Hey everybody, happy Juneteenth. Really excited to be here with you all tonight. My name is Leah Rocha. If you haven't joined a CJEM before, I'm a program coordinator for Sustainable Georgia Futures, and I have the great pleasure of helping run these CJEMs every month. So really excited. Tonight we're going to be talking about kind of a heavy topic, but I'm really hopeful that we'll have some great discussions around this, and I think it's really important as it is Juneteenth that we talk about, issues that are important in and around, the Black community here in Atlanta. So we're gonna be talking about housing and displacement, and we can go to the next slide. All right, so per usual, we're going to give you a little bit of information about who we are, and we'll just head straight into tonight's presentation. We'll talk a lot about the issue of housing and displacement. We'll start with a grounding quote, which is really an amazing quote. And then we'll get into Atlanta's historical identity, talk a little bit about gentrification's impact, climate and displacement, but more so about displacement, and then talk about what's next and some new tools. And then we'll have a house meeting and get you guys out of here for the evening to enjoy the rest of your Juneteenth. All right. So here at Sustainable Georgia Futures, we are a grassroots organization dedicated to creating green economy pathways for communities of color in Georgia. We foster safe, resilient spaces that amplify diverse voices and address the systemic barriers marginalized groups face. And we envision a future where Black and frontline communities lead in achieving environmental and economic justice, sustaining their health, well-being, and prosperity across generations. I know tonight's CGIM is about housing and displacement, but when we talk about our vision, we're having a really incredible event tomorrow, a kickoff dinner to celebrate our pre-apprentices, which is really awesome, and our pre-apprenticeship program. It really encapsulates, our vision. So just wanted to uplift that really, really fast. We can go to the next slide. All right, so we love to start off with community agreements. We have some established community agreements already that we worked on at the beginning of the year. If you're unfamiliar with community agreements, they're a tool to ensure fair, equitable representation in discussing key community issues. And we like to just ask, what do you need to feel seen, heard, and safe in our space today? So if you want to check out those community agreements, I'm sure someone will drop a link. This is the board that we have kind of going. So take some time, kind of familiarize yourself. I can read these off really quickly. So some of our established community agreements are 1, don't yuck my yum, very important. 2, step up, step back. 3, give encouragement. 4, address problems and not character. 5, respect each other. 6, brave space. 7, respect supersedes everything. 8, ask the question. There are no dumb questions here. 9, lead with compassion. 10, everyone's opinion is important. And 11, truth is carrying. So those are our community agreements. If you have any more, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll go ahead and add them to the mural board to further strengthen our community agreements. So now we can go. I actually think that's it for me for now. I'm going to hand it over to Adrian to get us into our presentation for tonight.
Thank you, Leah. Okay, so I'm just going to say this quote right here. Is this we when we're trying to talk about something, we often look back to the ancestors to help us ground us. And we at SGF, we love Audre Lorde. We read a lot of her past writings and quotes and poems to help guide us. And we often ask ourselves, well, what would Aunt Audrey do? What would she do? Uh, and so for tonight, we have this grounding quote: for the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us temporarily to beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. And so we bring Audre Lorde's words into this space because they help us talk about the tools of oppression, both old and new, that keep us from having safe, affordable housing. This space is about sharing ideas, naming the barriers, and thinking together about the tools we can build to push back. We're not here to find all the answers. We're not going to find them all. but to have real, honest conversations about how we got here and where we can go from here. So, to further make this point that was just made about the tools, Audre Lorde tools, we need to first examine the root cause. So, as y'all can see up there, SGF logo is the Sankofa bird. And if you don't know what that means, it means to look back and retrieve and bring forward the things that are good and reconcile the things that are bad to allow us to navigate certain situations, and in this case, situation of displacement. So today we're going to look at what the root is, what the trunk is, and what the symptom to better understand where we are right now. So by show of hands, I'm going to look and see how many people are familiar with this method of root cause analysis. So I see a couple of people, saying that they're familiar with it. If you come out of the business world, um, if you come out of the business world, a lot of times they use this in different ways, and we've also used it in community. We have a workshop that is focused. This is a part of a larger workshop, but we're going to use this to demonstrate how we want you guys to look at what we're trying to present to you today. And it's really important that we use this for when we get into the breakout rooms and we begin to have conversation. So with root cause analysis, and if you're interested in coming to one of our 3-day workshops, we will have this in there, and you can sign up for it next year. Not going to be this year. This year is already packed with stuff to do. All right. So, but this is root cause analysis, right? And so the root represents the fruit. So let's start at the fruit. Okay. So the fruit is the tree, what is bearing in the fruit. So when you think of the fruit, when we're looking at root cause analysis, that represents the key manifestation of symptoms of a problem that impact people and in the environment and the community. So we're talking about housing and displacement tonight. That's the fruit, okay, of what has been happening, right? Now, the trunk represents the structures, the practices, the policies, and institutionalized things that have made this fruit an issue, right? So an example would be redlining, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight, right? And then the roots. So the roots represent the root cause of the problem, which creates the context that drives the institutions and the policies in the trunk and allows for the creation of the fruit. So the root causes are usually historical, political, and social systems, and that's the context of it, which often is difficult for us to see or identify. And that's the beauty of it. That's how it works, right? While the trunk and the fruit can usually be seen and touched. All right, I'm gonna leave it right there. Okay. So we wanted you guys to think about, because the way that we have this presentation today, we always start with the root. We always start with any presentation with SGF with what happened in the past, then we get to the trunk, then we get to where we're at, and we discuss ways to move forward, right? But we wanted to look at this graph right here, because the root causes we'll examine tonight reach far beyond displacement and gentrification. We know this. And they give rise to extractive systems many of us have to navigate on a daily, right? So we're talking about school systems, we're talking about prison systems, we're talking about war, right? We're talking about the industrial complexes in every different type of way that we have to swim and navigate our way through, right? And then we're talking about, because this is not something that we came up with, the Climate Justice Alliance came up with the extractive and regenerative or living way of thinking, right? We're talking about taking those systems that we know that we have incorporated in our daily, that is a part of our DNA as well too. And whether you want to believe it or not, we are a part of this system, right? And so by identifying it, we want to filter it through and we want it to become something that is living, right? Because at SGF, we believe a living economy is not only possible, it's within our reach. Even with all of the stuff that's happening, it's within our reach. So while tonight's focus is on housing and displacement, know that our commitment extends beyond this moment. Together with our partners, and we have some that are on tonight, we are working towards a just transition that will make the living economy we all deserve a reality. All right. So, with that being said, I'm going to hand this over to Leah and and then Ty, and I think that might be just enough time for me to go get my keys back from my car because they just said my brakes are done. Be right back, y'all.
Thanks, Adrienne. Alrighty, so here's the problem. Atlanta has been referred to as the Black Mecca, but since 2000, more than 22,000 Black residents have been displaced from the city, the highest rate among major U.S. metros. And that's a problem. So today we're going to be talking about barriers like highways and redlining, and people who unknowingly and knowingly helped to orchestrate this problem. And what we are trying to do here today, like Adrian just kind of was getting into, is not be extractive and tell you what needs to happen. We can all be, again, really complicit in using, the quote unquote master's tools unintentionally. And so, we really just want to kind of sit with the issue and the mindsets that have created these issues. So back to the problem. As of May 2025, a wave of new reports has underscored what many Atlantans have already felt in their bones, that gentrification is really reshaping the soul of the city. Before our very eyes, legacy Black communities are disappearing, and now the data is catching up to the truth we've all been living. Neighborhoods once defined by deep roots, shared struggle, and cultural brilliance are being priced out, redeveloped, and erased. So on the next two slides, we'll kind of walk through some of the most recent findings, one or two that are on the screen right now. And the headlines are they're harrowing, but they make one thing painfully clear, and that this isn't just regular change. This is really displacement by design. All right, so first, 40% of evictions in gentrifying neighborhoods target Black residents. So in Atlanta's gentrifying neighborhoods, Black renters face eviction at disproportionately high rates, making up 40% of cases in areas undergoing reinvestment. And these evictions are not accidental. They reflect the systemic targeting of Black tenants in neighborhoods that are suddenly seen as valuable. So when we're going to talk a lot about Old Fourth Ward, that was an area that was like essentially divested from 10 plus years ago. It was really not the Ponce City Market and the Old Fourth Ward, Ponce Highlands that it is today. So once it was seen as valuable and that, that infrastructure was needed, it's also what we like to call climate resilient. That's when it was snatched up. And, that's when they come in, they lower the property values and then snatch it back up when they want to. And go to the next slide. 19,000 plus rental homes in Metro Atlanta are owned by just 3 companies. And this is something that SGF has covered for the last 3 to 4 years. I think we did a CJEM on corporate home ownership in the city maybe 1 to 2 years ago. So we feel like we have to really continue to drive home this point. And this came out of a research study by GSU. And it really, really only helps magnify this extremely pressing issue with data to support our claims. These bulk purchases began post 2008 when foreclosed homes were scooped up by Wall Street firms. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but corporate landlords like Progress Residential and Invitation Homes convert family housing into profit engines, raising rents, evicting very aggressively, and extracting wealth from historically Black neighborhoods. And with that, I will pass it on to Ty.
Thank you, Leah. Thank y'all for joining us tonight. This is a hot topic and it's hot for a reason. We've seen, just in the past few years how rapidly Atlanta has changed. And it's not just Atlanta. This is impacting throughout the state, and throughout the nation. So we're going to take a second to look at how we got here. I believe this image is from the Old Fourth Ward, where you can see like a modern high rise, probably a townhouse that is worth 900 to 1 point, no, 900,000 to 1.1 million, probably, next to a row house that had been there. And who knows um, how long it will stay, given how developers move. So let's take a look at how we got here. So those of you that know me know that I'm a map girl through and through. So the map that you see on your screen to the left, this one from 1938, is from the Homeowners and Loan Corporation. This was a government entity that would distribute loans out to prospective homeowners following World War One, and going into World War Two is when they really picked up. So when Franklin D. Roosevelt was president and the New Deal was rolling out, of course, the rollout of their um, social infrastructure measures was not evenly distributed. Black folks hardly saw anything of benefit from those programs. Meanwhile, their white counterparts took readily advantage of what those programs had to offer. One of those things was home loans. So the Homeowners and Loan Corporation was developed in order to, really map out for banks where would be the best places to rent, or like to extend loans to people to purchase housing. So the map on the left is the original. When you hear redlining, this is what the map that comes from. Everything that's in red on the left-hand side was considered very dangerous to extend a loan out to. For banks to extend loans out to, there was an assumption that you would never get your mortgage payments back, and that there would be a default on the loan, not for any particular reason. For the most part, it was mostly a racialized issue. If you were Black or a person of color, they tended to lump your neighborhood into this category to where you would get either a subprime loan or no loan at all. On up to green areas, which you can see on both ends, on both maps, those were automatic. If someone is applying for a home loan there and they're white and they have means, then extend the mortgage. There shouldn't be any problem. Blue fell in the upper part of that middle range, and yellow was in the danger zone. If you look at the map on your right, it's pretty much the same map from 1938, but these are some of the gentrification hotspots. And you can see a lot of the colors haven't changed. What you'll notice is that it's just a rebranding of redlining, what's happening with gentrification, right? Redlining was a federal housing policy that deliberately categorized Black and immigrant neighborhoods as hazardous investments. That's the red areas, not because of economic instability, but because of who lived there. And this practice denied entire communities access to home loans, capital, and insurance. And this is very important when we think about the racial wealth gap, especially in a city like Atlanta that has the highest racial wealth gap in the nation. The damage didn't stop with the home loans. The same redlined areas were later targets for urban renewal and highway construction, and also for all of the trash that came on the back end of those urban renewal projects. Decades of disinvestment made them politically vulnerable, and these residents became more and more easy to displace. And this is where we begin to see that displacement was not random, but it was orchestrated. First, Black communities were boxed in and starved of resources. Then they were bulldozed in the name of progress, which brings us to the next chapter in this story, the construction of Atlanta's highway system and how it carved through Black neighborhoods with surgical precision. I want you to keep a mental snapshot of these maps in your mind, particularly the red areas, as we look at more areas where some of the major highways run through the city. So remember those two maps that we just saw, right? The red areas of these maps would be somewhere in this area, right? On both sides. While some of the green and blue neighborhoods are centered up here, yellow neighborhoods are centered around this corridor, right? So on the left, um, you'll see a map tracing the path of I-20, which if you are in Atlanta, you probably hit I-20 every single day. Even if you don't, you hit the traffic of it for sure. And it was built in the 60s, 70s, right? And it cuts right through all of those red areas that we looked at. If you're ever on I-20, if you live in Atlanta and you see like Lee Street, you see Whitehall Street, you see, you know, Ralph David Abernathy, all of those were Black areas and still are. Um, on the right, it shows, and I-20 runs right through those streets and through those neighborhoods. However, on the right, you see I-40, 485, which was never constructed. So that's this blue line, and it's an unbuilt freeway that would have created a second north-south interstate parallel to today's I-75, I-85. So anyone who's been caught on those exits on 85, 75, going towards the Carter Center and going towards the MLK Memorial, you know it gets really, really tight right there. I-485 would have cut through that so that all of that traffic didn't have to swing into 75, 85. You may ask why that wasn't built. It was slated to cut through white affluent areas like Morningside, but it was stopped not by planners, but by residents who organized, protested, and were heard. To be clear, their affluence was what translated into political power. Black communities haven't been offered the same protection or platform to resist, even though in Atlanta, Black communities have done it despite not having access to those things. I-20, on the other hand, was built and tore through historic Black communities like Mechanicsville and Summerhill, displacing thousands and erasing homes, churches, and local businesses. And these weren't just roads. They were lines drawn through the heart of Atlanta, and of Black Atlanta specifically, making a way for future white-centered investment. Also, we know that this isn't ancient history. It's the foundation of today's gentrification. Highways carved through and devalued Black neighborhoods, making them ripe for exploitation once urban revival, also known as urban renewal, became profitable. What was once redlined and neglected is now rezoned and rebranded, often without people who make those communities what they were still there. Meanwhile, a lack of reliable transit infrastructure keeps many displaced residents disconnected from resources, jobs, and options, reinforcing the very inequities these projects help create. We got one more map for y'all. So gentrification in Atlanta, this is from, I want to say 2018. So it's a little bit older, but I think it still holds up pretty well. I'm zooming in just so we can get a better kind of look at the specific neighborhoods. The breakdown of this map, the color code, is essentially the same as it was in the Homeowners and Loan Corporation map from the 30s, except green represents places that are already gentrified. There's no going back. It just is what it is at that point. You're not going to make Virginia Highland not have money at this point. The lighter blue areas like downtown, English Avenue, Bankhead, Hunter Hills, the West End, those are primed for gentrification at that point in 2018. So these are places where you're feeling a little bit of the pressure, but it's not as baked in. The dark blue areas are at late stage gentrification, so they're on their way to becoming green kind of areas. The lightest blue, Grove Park, Collier Heights, Cascade, Sylvan Hills, those are areas that could see moves towards gentrification in the near future, but maybe not as imminent as the teal kind of colors. And then red is at no risk of current plans for gentrification. So if you remember that red kind of portion of the Homeowners Loan Corporation map, all of this right here was red at one point. There were no home loans that were going out. But now, with the building of, let's say, the Mercedes-Benz Stadium right here between English Avenue, Vine City, and downtown, now gentrification is more possible. This purple line is the proposed Beltline connector. And as you can see, everything within the Beltline connector is either at risk or already currently on some stage of gentrification. So neighborhoods like Summerhill, Mechanicsville, and even the AUC, the Atlanta University Center, were once redlined and systematically neglected, and they're now at the epicenter of real estate speculation and so-called revitalization. These communities are being positioned as the next frontiers for luxury development, rising rents, and cultural erasure. And it's not just any developer stepping in. Like Leah had mentioned earlier, only 3 companies own almost 20,000 homes for rent in Atlanta today. There's a similar story with apartments and new high-rise eat, play, live spaces. There's a firm out of New York that's responsible for transforming, quote unquote, and gentrifying areas like Jamaica, Queens. It's called BRP Companies, and they've now secured the contract to redevelop the West End Mall. This isn't a coincidence. It's a continuation of a broader pattern of displacement disguised as progress. The wave isn't coming, it's already here. So, like Leah mentioned earlier, we've been feeling this. If you've lived in Atlanta at this point for any amount of time, but especially if you grew up in Atlanta, you have been seeing this and feeling this. But when you see the pictures of what was there versus what's there now, it really sets in that like the wave is here. So these are images of 2 of Atlanta's blackest neighborhoods at one point. Mechanicsville is still holding on a little bit, but Summerhill, not so much. So Summerhill, these houses were row houses and
Shotgun houses.
shotgun houses, exactly. So there would be, you see the kids playing in the yard and everything. This is still in living memory for many of our neighbors, right? Of being able to sit on the porch and you see, you know everybody's name on the street. And there were a lot of Black professionals who lived in Summerhill, especially those who taught at the AU Center. And now Summerhill looks like this. There's a Little Tart Bakery. There's breweries and things of that nature. Not saying that those things are bad. It's just when they come and they raise the rents and the property values because they're looking to bring in young professionals, code word for young white professionals, into these neighborhoods. They're trying to make Atlanta look like something that's not true to the essence of what Atlanta is. Mechanicsville, we see something similar. These high rises that are going up. Also, everything kind of looks the same too, which is by design. So you know your displacement when you see it. This is what Mechanicsville looked like before they put a major road through. This is after they bulldozed to make way. So you can see there were some similar houses, shotgun houses to Summerhill. Leah?
I was just gonna say, quick note about Summerhill. It really is insane to look at these two pictures and even just think for like the last maybe 3 years, just how much that area has changed. Like the little tart being built was really like that first kind of leg of it, and now it's like they've got a Cava, a Jersey Mike's, a Publix. Like I used to live in Mechanicsville, which isn't too far from Summerhill, and like, yeah, that stuff was just not there. So it's just really crazy. I drove past her the other day and just really crazy to see it.
Right. And especially to think about why these things weren't there for the people who lived there before. It's not like it wasn't desired to have a bakery that you could walk to and get like a cup of coffee and a scone or something in the morning. It just wasn't something that was considered valuable enough for the people who lived originally there to have. And I think it's important for us to continue to get to the root of that, to look at what the tools are that have been put together and orchestrated to make that the case.
Right.
Um, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to Adrian to discuss one of those tools, the narrative tool of Atlanta as the Black Mecca. So, Adrian?
Right. Thank you. So I know that many of you have heard the phrase Black Mecca, right? It's often when if when people find out when I used to travel a lot as a young person in my 20s, one of the things that people would say to me through my travels throughout the country is, "Oh, you're from the Black Mecca." Or when Atlanta Wise Housewives came on, they said that, and that was horrid. So um, but we are known for this. And let's talk about this phrase. Let's talk about narratives, right? We are a land of narratives, right? We are the land of the White House being, framed the shiny place on the hill, right? And so Atlanta had a narrative that's like that as well. So the phrase Black Mecca, for those who do not know, was first used to describe Atlanta in 1971. It was Ebony magazine. They spotlighted the city's growing Black middle class, booming Black entrepreneurship, and political power. And for decades, Atlanta stood apart, a Southern city where Black excellence, leadership, and culture weren't just surviving, they were thriving. In spite of all of those things that Leah and Ty just put you that you all went through, it was known to be the city that was doing that. So that legacy was shaped by history, the presence of Morehouse, Spelman, Clark, Atlanta, and Morris Brown, the organizing ground of the civil rights movement, and the election of Maynard Jackson in 1973, Atlanta's first Black mayor. By the 1980s, Atlanta was the only major U.S. city where Black people held and sustained political control. So, in spite of all of the efforts to keep Black people in their place, as Nicole Hannah-Jones refers to it, Black Atlantans not only preserved, but found success politically and socially. But in recent decades, the foundation of that legacy has shifted. So between 2000 and 2020, the Black share of Atlanta's population has dropped, y'all, from 61% to just under 48%. So those are real numbers. We're talking about tens of thousands of Black families that have been pushed out, and often not by accident, but by design. So this change isn't just about gentrification. Because, yeah, we do a climate gentrification walk, and we're talking about gentrification as one of those systems or fruits that is happening. But this is about investment. and divestment and development and policies that have systemically reshaped who gets to live and lead here. Because yes, because when you have a city of over 61% population of folks who are of a certain demographic, of course you're going to have political people who are going to be able to sustain, because people want to see folks that represent them and look like them. But when you have 48%, that's not even 50%. So of course that is going to change the dynamics of this place. And let me tell you something about someone who actually grew up here. My elders would always talk about this, because the fact of the matter is, yeah, we got some Black millionaires in here. Yeah, we got some working class, and we even got a lot of Black middle class, probably more than others. But Atlanta is made up of working class people. We're working class people. My Aunt Emily, who helped raise me, she had a 3rd grade education. She retired from Nabisco. She bought her house in East Point. And those are the people of Atlanta with a minimum wage of $5.15 an hour. Those are the real people that are in Atlanta, that made Atlanta go, that made, if you are a transplant, made you want to come here. Those are the people. So since the 2008, I guess I'm going to the next slide. Since the 2008 housing has been, since 2008, housing has been redefined, no longer a human right, but an investment strategy. We all are seeing this. So we all know what happened in the 2008, right? It was the housing market crash and people lost their home. My family was one of the families that had one of those subprime lending loans. We lost our home. Thank God we were able to get one back, but you know that took away from the wealth that we had built, right? So in 2008, housing was redefined because now in Atlanta was one of the largest places. It was where you had the largest amount of Black people losing their homes because they had been given those subprime or those predatory loans for their housing. So what happens after that? In Metro Atlanta, private equity firms like Invitation Homes and Progress Residential gobbled up the foreclosed homes, turning our crisis into cash. So the results, a shift from ownership to rentership, especially in the Black neighborhoods. Families who once aspired to own now pay inflated rents to distant corporations with no stake in the community's well-being. Maintenance is delayed. Evictions are common. The wealth that should stay in neighborhoods is siphoned out like a dividend. This is financialized housing. This is actually a definition, guys. Look it up. It's one of the most powerful forces behind modern day displacement. So, as you can see here, we were talking about extraction. This is incentivized to extract from by financialization of housing. Next slide, please. So the Atlanta Beltline was sold to the public as a unifying vision, a green loop connecting neighborhoods. Ty showed you that purple loop that circled around, promoting equity and enhancing mobility. But in practice, the Beltline has become a conveyor belt of displacement. So it began as a bold idea. Come with me, y'all. I'm gonna tell you a story. It began as a bold idea by Ryan Gravel. How many people know who Ryan Gravel is? Well, he was a smart, young, white whippersnapper from Georgia Tech, grad student who saw a chance to repurpose an old rail lines into something more human, a space connection, equity, and environmental sustainability. Now, let me say this about Ryan Gravel. I just joked about him But I honestly believe that this man did not have any bad intentions. I believe that he was a student, like many of us are students, and he was working and living in this extractive world that have taught us how to be extractive. So I want you to know that, even though I made a joke, we are all victims of being Ryan Gravel. And if you think that you cannot be him, then you need to think again. Because, and we don't doubt that Ryan's intentions was good, as I stated. But as we know, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. And that's why it is, because we never think that we could do these things. Because no matter how well-meaning, and I'm just going to say this because he grew up in Chamblee, right? And if you don't really know about Atlanta growing up, everybody say they're from Atlanta now. They could have grown up in Gwinnett. They could have grown up in Sandy Springs. They could have, I see somebody on here smiling because they from here and they know what I'm about to say is the truth. They could have grown up in Marietta, but now when you meet somebody on the street and if they are within 20 miles of Atlanta, they from Atlanta, okay? But when I grew up, when you said you were from Atlanta, when you said you were from the inner city, and these people from all these other sparkling other places was saying that they were from other places, honey, they looked their nose, they hooked their nose up so high and looked down on you. But now they from Atlanta, right? So I wanted to point that out. Because when we say he was an outsider, that's what we mean by he was an outsider. Not only was he an outsider, but he was an outsider with a mindset that he thought of people in Atlanta in a certain way, because not only did he think of people in Atlanta as a certain way, the rest of the people who surrounded Atlanta and lived in those suburbs, 9 times out of 10, they felt the same way. So when you think a certain way, you move a certain way. Okay? So he was an outsider, as I said before. And when outsiders design solutions to communities instead of with them, the results is often harm. The results are always the same. That's what's happened here. So Gravel grew up in Chamblee, okay? Not in the Old Fourth Ward or in the West End, where displacement is highest. His thesis wasn't shaped by the lived experiences of displaced residents, rather by the mythos of community before conciliation. When the city and private developers took over, the Beltline became a symbol of transformation, but not for the people who had long called these neighborhoods home. So we say this to say that no matter where you're from, good intentions with improper execution could be painfully detrimental. And we have all either been there before or could be there in the future. Because in each one of our positions, okay, we have power. You may not know your power, but you do have power. Next slide, please. Is this me or it is me? Okay. So in 2000, the 04 Ward was 94% Black. Today it's just 33%. So what changed? Not the demographics. Policies. The city divestment in this neighborhood for decades, then paved them over with luxury housing, upscale markets, glossy public art, anchors like Punt City Market turned cultural memory in the real estate currency. Average rent along the Beltline is now over $2,000. The promise of the 5,600 affordable units only partially delivered, and many are still unaffordable for former residents. And despite public demand, there are no binding community benefits agreement. There's no community benefits agreement. You might go to a Beltline meeting and they may say that there's a CBA, but it's not contractual, and they developed it. So it wasn't developed in conjunction with the community. It was developed and they were like, here you go. We're going to give you, when you had 100% of this neighborhood, we're going to give you 30%, and didn't even give them that. Okay. So that means developers weren't required to follow through on affordability. So, because if you don't have a CBA that's contractual, what's going to hold them accountable? Or they don't have to adhere to affordability. They don't have to adhere to hiring people who are from this neighborhood or from Atlanta, or protections for legacy tenants. They don't have to do none of that. All of it was performance. So this is how gentrification works. And we don't even think gentrification is a bad word, but displacement along with gentrification is bad, right? So a well-intentioned project disconnected from community power becomes a vehicle for displacement. Real resilience requires more than good ideas. It demands shared leadership, deep listening, and local control. So we explored this story in detail on our climate gentrification walk, tour, where we trace how entire communities were pushed out, one bike trail and brewery at a time, because I ain't never seen no brewery before. We know something is up. Used to be coffee shop, but now you see a brewery, you know, they trying to gentrify us. If any one of the team,
the best part about,
if anyone could drop the YABE article, we did one with NPR with our climate gentrification
It's
walk.
later in the presentation too.
Wonderful. Somebody can drop that. But with that being said, you know, I'm giving my little rant because I'm from here and my team allows me to do it. I'm gonna give it to Leah so we can dig a little bit deeper into this, and then we get a chance to do some breakouts and talk about this as a community. All right, Leah.
All right, and Ty, if you might, when you go to the next slide, just press the video so it pauses right away.
the best part.
Sorry, y'all, we have a video
The
in
best.
Well, maybe we can just let it play actually. So I'll
Yeah.
just kind of give an intro and then we can go to the next slide. So the next slide is called Rebranding Atlanta, who gets to define the city now. And like Adrian just said, Atlanta is changing, and it's not just demographically, but culturally. And this city's historic identity as being, you know, a Black Mecca is really being reshaped by a new wave of white transplants, and, you know, not just white transplants, just transplants in general from, you know, northern cities, West Coast cities where rent is crazy high, coming here and then driving the rent up here as well. But again, transplants, many of whom arrive with little awareness of Atlanta's civil rights legacy or the structural violence of redlining and divestment. And so the video that's about to play for you guys is a well-known TikTok influencer. His name is Jack. And it's not just him. A lot of these influencers have really become some of the city's loudest tour guides. And in one viral post, he refers to the Beltline, a development deeply tied to displacement, as the Times Square of the South, which is odd for many reasons, but it's really not just out of touch. It's really telling. And so for many of these newcomers, Atlanta starts and ends with breweries, brunch, and bike trails. But those same trails were paved over once Black neighborhoods. And what's presented as new is, you know, often a repackaging of communities that were neglected, erased, and then rebranded. So I'll let that video play and then I'll talk a little bit more.
The best part about living on the Atlanta Beltline is you got restaurants like this. Yeah. Hawkers on the Beltline, the vibes here are immaculate. And that is delicious. You got Yeppa opening back here soon, Yuji Sushi, restaurants and bars lining the entire thing. From Muchacho all the way down to Piedmont Park. Unbeatable, Times Square of the South.
All right. So I want to tell you some irony about Jack. He works for BlackRock, one of the largest asset manager companies that we all know tends to be extremely, extremely extractive. And I won't go down that rabbit hole, but these narratives matter. So when influencers flatten Atlanta into an Instagrammable playground, they override generations of struggle and survival. They frame gentrified spaces as if they were always this way, erasing the people who made those neighborhoods possible in the first place. And I chose this video, but when I tell you there were tens, 20, I don't even know how many videos he has, but there's his whole content is basically just about whitewashing Atlanta. There's some celebration of Black Atlanta here and there, but I'm not, this is a personal opinion, but when you're touting businesses like Muchacho and Lady Bird that, have called ICE on their employees, like it kind of shows where you stand. And then also he has a video where he talks about his first year of living in Atlanta. And he talks about, yeah, it's safe. There's a lot of stuff to do, just I like to walk the Beltline during the day and talking about like safe areas in the city and just it's a real kind of colonizer mindset. So I'll leave you guys with that. I can go on a tangent about this for a very long time. But I'm going to hand it over to Adrian to kind of close us out of this information overload portion of the presentation.
Okay, I just feel like we're winding down to these doggone CJEMs, and this one I'm feeling good about. I feel like I'm looking in the chat. We got the right amount of frustration from people in their responses, and so that is always barometer. All right, so here's the thing. Again, SGF logo is the Sankofa bird. If you don't know, look up there. It's right there. And it's a symbol that looks back while moving forward. It reminds us to reach into the past to carry forward what's good. Even when our history is painful, it holds lessons we need to move with more intention and care. Okay. So when we talk about housing, we have to acknowledge the history, the patterns of divestment, the displacement and policy decisions that pushed people, especially Black and Brown communities, out of the places they call home. But in looking back, we also see efforts that aim to protect people. Rent stabilization, community land trust, bonding community agreements. These approaches were crafted in response to real conditions. They may not be perfect or universal, but they reflect a different set of values, ones that center people, not just justice. So you see right here, and in saying that, we see this House Bill 555. So, which proposes to cap corporate landlords at 2,000 single family homes, which I still think that is a lot, but it is a start. It's where we can build upon. And then we have HB 404, the Safe Housing Act, that acts basic rental protections and remove the requirements to earn 3 times the rent. These aren't comprehensive changes, but they show that there is energy building to shift how we think about housing, even with it being unevenly. And what we've been exploring is not just policy, but mindsets. What this was about today was about mindsets, y'all. Because right now, I saw some like, what are we gonna do? I always tell people when they ask, what should we do? Because they're ready to jump, they're ready to get froggy, like right away. But my ancestors and my elders always tell me, when you don't know what to do, sometimes the best thing to do is be still. Be still and think about yourself. So a regenerative mindset means thinking beyond quick fixes and towards ways of moving that restore, repair, and reconnect. It means recognizing that housing is not just about buildings or markets, but about care, community, and belonging. And we don't have all of the answers, y'all. And we're not going to have all the answers tonight. We're not here to decide what's right for every community. Communities should decide that for themselves. But we do want to hold space for deeper reflection and stay committed to learning, listening, and moving forward in ways that honor those who came before us and those still fighting to stay rooted.